Good evening, I'm Neil Walker and this is Nightline. Tonight, one peace mission fails, another begins against enormous odds. And at home, talk of more troops being sent to the Gulf. Thanks for joining us. They spent 6 hours and 27 minutes together, and in the end, we stand one day closer to war. The stalemate between Secretary of State James Baker and Iraqi Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz leaves little room for other diplomats to avert war, but hope is alive. United Nations Secretary General Perez de Cuellar leaves tonight for Baghdad.
Tariq Aziz went into the meeting smiling. Secretary Baker was not. They shook hands, but only when a photographer suggested it. The morning session lasted more than 2 hours. Because nobody walked out, stock markets reacted positively and oil prices dropped. At the lunch break, Baker telephoned President Bush. The White House said the Geneva talks were substantive. But hopes and the stock markets soon faded. Neither side would give anything. Baker said Iraq must withdraw from Kuwait. Aziz said a settlement must be linked to the Palestinian issue. The talks were polite, no thumping the table, but when they ended after more than 6 hours, Baker said he was somber, and he looked it.
In over 6 hours, I heard nothing that suggested to me any Iraqi flexibility whatsoever on complying with the United Nations Security Council resolutions.
Tariq Aziz said Iraq had not miscalculated and was ready for war. He spoke of grave differences over Israel and the Palestinians.
If the Palestinian question is not resolved, we do not feel secure in our country. He said he does not believe that. I told him, okay, test us.
He was asked about war and Israel. The answer was chilling.
Mr. Foreign Minister, if the war starts in the Middle East, in the Gulf, will you attack Israel?
Yes, absolutely yes.
In Washington, President Bush's reaction to the talks was one of disappointment and frustration.
This was a total stiff arm. This was a total rebuff.
But even with the deadline approaching, he still believes there's a chance to avoid war.
Let me emphasize that I have not given up on a peaceful outcome. It's not too late.
France's President Mitterrand is one of those trying to find a diplomatic solution. He's expected to unveil a plan shortly, but it's likely to include a conference covering all Mid-East issues, a move the Americans are unlikely to support. For the moment, the best hope lies with UN Secretary General Perez de Cuellar, who plans to visit Baghdad possibly tomorrow.
And now I feel that it is my moral duty as Secretary General of the United Nations, a peaceful organization, to do everything in order to avoid the worst.
Just 5 days now to the UN deadline. The international diplomacy will continue, but so will the preparations for war. Paul Marshall, Geneva, 3 National News.
The dairy board is responding to the latest developments by evacuating all its people in Bahrain until the threat of war is over. And while they'll be leaving the area, the Deputy Prime Minister is hinting more New Zealand troops could be heading for the desert if it comes to war.
Still a few days, but certainly time appears to be running out.
While expressing hope war can be avoided, Deputy Prime Minister Don McKinnon says the government will consider any further call to arms.
And we would certainly heed any call for assistance, as we have heeded so far, which began with a call from Kuwait government itself.
His comments were condemned by peace groups. They're critical the medical unit is poised to join the Air Force detachment already in the Gulf.
Ever since the National Party came to power, it seemed to us probable that this would be their policy. And it's now emerged from statements which have been evasive to ones which are coming much more clear and forthright.
As the Gulf crisis worsens, the government's message to New Zealanders still in the region is clear. Get out and get out fast. External Relations estimate about 400 New Zealanders remain in the Middle East, many in Israel, which Iraq says is an immediate target in the event of war. Already New Zealanders in the peace camp on the Saudi-Iraq border have made escape plans, according to Wellingtonian Trace Hodgson, now on his way home. The New Zealand medical unit awaits orders to depart as civilians plan to flee the war zone. And in the event of war, they may be followed by more New Zealand military. Stephen Christensen, 3 National News.
Whether or not New Zealand steps up its troop involvement, the bottom line is any conflict will be led by the American military command. And strategists in the United States were saying today that war could begin on the stroke of midnight, Baghdad time, on January the 15th.
Before that day, there will be more than 2,000 U.S. warplanes on land and sea ready to strike key targets in Iraq and occupied Kuwait. Sources say it would be the first phase of a punishing air war, which may last longer than 2 weeks. It will be like no war ever fought, with smart bombs and missiles striking targets throughout Iraq. The first strikes will be against Saddam's ground-to-ground Scud missiles.
The Scud missiles could be used preemptively. In other words, they could be used even before hostilities are initiated on the U.S. side.
Also among the first targets attacked will be all the concrete bunkers used by Saddam and his military leadership in an all-out effort to kill the men who give the orders. The guiding policy for U.S. commanders is to destroy as swiftly and as brutally as possible Iraq's ability to fight back. NBC News has been told that is essentially what President Bush wrote to Saddam in the letter which was not delivered, that Saddam risked the destruction of his entire country. Only after an unprecedented bombing campaign would U.S. ground forces be ordered to reclaim Kuwait. In that way, the president hopes to minimize U.S. casualties. One Pentagon source said, if all goes as planned, U.S. dead and wounded could be fewer than 1,000, a far cry from the 40,000 estimated by the administration's detractors.
Their innocence.
Gary Kelly, we're watching Secretary of State Baker now enter this briefing room, and we're about to hear...
It's lunchtime at Crosby Elementary School, but you don't hear the constant chatter. Today, all eyes are on the TV, kids listening to the latest news about the Gulf crisis, hoping to hear that mom or dad will be home soon.
I heard nothing that suggested to me any Iraqi flexibility whatsoever on complying with...
But we're going to start with Angie, and she's going to share with some of the pictures that she received from Saudi Arabia.
Back at class, the students talk about their feelings. They may not understand why war happens, but they know what it means, and that the chance for war is closer than ever.
I think the war is going to start, and that lots of people are going to get killed. And
not every student has a parent in the Gulf, but they all know someone who does.
It is people just like yourself that gives me inspiration to keep going on another day.
When times get tough, they find strength in each other.
Some of my friends, they'll tell me, don't worry, he'll be back soon, and just wait, he'll be home. And that really helps me to get through.
For some of the kids, it's easier to talk about Operation Desert Shield and war against Saddam Hussein.
First thing, I think he's a nut. Just totally crazy, doesn't know what he's doing.
But for other students, it's much harder to deal with.
There's just so many people over there and families, and we're getting so many letters, and the people have so many families that they don't get to see on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day.
And if there's one message these students could deliver to President Bush and Saddam Hussein, this would be it.
I just hope they get peace and that they can come home safe and that we don't have to have war.